And I'm back. Enjoy. Thank you so much for listening to The Age of Jeremy. My name is Jeremy Quintanilla. This is a podcast all about my business adventures and side quests. Today, we are going to be talking about how leaders learn and looking at the gaps that I've found in some of my leadership as I continue to learn. And actively learning, I guess, would be the main thing that we're trying to accomplish. But before we do that, make sure that you check out ageofradio.com for all of the Age of Radio podcasts, including my podcast, The Age of Jeremy. But we also have other great podcasts like the CJV podcast, Mysterious Circumstances, some old amazing podcasts like Color Me Dead, some new amazing podcasts like Maths Virgin. So make sure that you check those out. And if you are interested in joining the Age of Radio podcast network, you can reach us out at support@ageofradio.com. Age of Radio is a media company that has a podcast network that's for everyone. If you are interested in growing, distributing, and possibly monetizing your podcast, then reach out to us because we are here to help. Over 1 million downloads a year and over 100 shows, strong and continuing to grow. So check all of them out at ageofradio.com. I've been recently reading a book called How Leaders Learn, and I want to talk a little bit about actively learning from a leadership perspective and from a personal perspective, I suppose, on becoming an active learner. Reason being is because the fact that most of my time and day is all about just working, and I don't actively set time aside to learn new things, or more importantly, one of the things that I'm starting to realize, look at my gaps and figuring out specifically what my gaps are and what I need to do better with those specifically. Now, normally in this podcast, we usually have a news intro, but it's been a while since I've done this podcast, and I've been on a little bit of a hiatus, mainly because there have been a lot of changes in my life. Been really focusing on the Mercury show. If you don't watch Mercury, the YouTube at Age of Radioverse got taken down. So I actually created a brand new page just for Mercury so that those Mercury episodes don't get taken down and you can see all of the amazing Mercury shows, which will allow us to continue to grow the Mercury brand. And we're talking with YouTube, trying to get the YouTube site back up and running. But because of looking at Mercury, and one of the other things that happened was I didn't have a actual blocked time slot to do this podcast, so I had to rearrange my schedule to try to figure out exactly how I was going to get this in every single week, especially because we're going to be adding in more of our live conversations called Conversations, which is a live segment that will then be pushed over to a recording, and I have that one of those second conversations. The first one, I believe, was with Mario, if I'm not mistaken. There might have been one before that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but the new Conversations is a live show where I interview an entrepreneur. Going to try to get more into interviewing, and I love doing them as live interviews because the audience can interact, and that's one of the things that I love the most. But because we've taken this hiatus, I haven't actually had the opportunity to look at the news, to kind of construct what I wanted to talk about. And again, because this is all about my business adventures and side quests, I figured I would look at these gaps that I'm looking at in myself and how I'm going to try to actively try to fix them, one, and then two, looking at some of the ways that we could learn actively as leaders or as individuals, because I think that learning is the thing that really sets individuals apart, and always learning new things and being up with current technology, learning the new technology, deep diving with it, I think can also put us in a good position where we can set ourselves apart as leaders or as individuals. And so I've been reading this book by David Novak, who was one of the founders and CEO of Yum. If you don't know what Yum is the company that owns Taco Bell, owns Pizza Hut, owns, I think, Long John Silver's, owns KFC. They used to be owned by Pepsi, but eventually what I think happened was that Pepsi wanted to sell off the brands. And then what happened was David was inside of Taco Bell and they kind of spun it into a company called Yum, and then he took that over and he founded it, or he bought them, something along those lines. I didn't do a lot of research on that part, but he has this book called How Leaders Learn, and it was funny. My ex-wife Danielle, she was asked to read it, I think, for work, and it's been sitting on her desk, and I asked her if she had a chance to read it, and she said no. So I went ahead and bought the audio book so I could just listen to it while I was doing other things, and I just fell in love with this book. In fact, it's one of my favorite books so far, but it talks a lot about how people actively learn, and one of the main things that I've learned from it is that the people that are actively learning, they're really trying to solve problems. That's what decides what they learn next. And so when you're trying to solve problems, whether for yourself or whether you're for your relationship or whether for business, the active learning comes from trying to figure out how to do what it is that you're trying to do. So more information does not always equal better thinking. And so when we can look at those problems and silo what we're trying to learn so that we can solve those problems, that's how we just get better at learning more things. Most people think that leaders learn more than everyone else, and that's not necessarily true. I spend a lot of time leading, but I don't get to spend as much time learning. And so inside of the book, one of the things that it talks about is having leaders look at some of their gaps. And that's kind of where I started. So I do have a few gaps. My biggest gap that I have is I think my biggest gap is I'm not as communicative as I should be across all lines of business. And so I took a lot of communication courses in school, but I don't think that I communicate strongly enough with other people, and it's because I don't want to spend the time having them ask me questions about it and having me thoroughly talk about it. I have this arrogant mindset, I'll say, where I'm like, this is my idea, this is what we're going to do, this is the right way to do it, I can see what the future outcome is going to be, so we should just do it this way. And I need to change that about me, and I need to actively change that about me. And that's going to take me learning how to listen a little bit better, how to engage a little bit better, how to set up time to communicate better, set up time to have these longer conversations with individuals. Because I own so many businesses and because I do so much stuff inside of those businesses, I'm always specifically moving. And so when I have to stop to think about something or to talk to someone about something and to think about it with them, it just bogs me down, and I get kind of like overwhelmed. And I know that that's something that I need to work on. So that's my number one thing. And the reason why I'm telling you these, because I want you to understand that just because I have, I'm worth multi-millions of dollars, or I'm a multimillionaire, it's not so much that I know everything. It's not so much that I don't have hiccups. The reason why I've been so successful is because throughout my life, I've looked at those things and I said, shit, I need to be better at that. But if you're not sitting down and thinking about those things, and you can't think of if you're not sitting down and thinking about those things, you're never going to introspectively look at yourself and be like, what can I specifically do different, and where are some of my hiccups? And that's my biggest one that I have that I'm aware of. The second thing that I have a problem with as a leader is not actively listening or thoughtfully listening when it comes to team members. I feel that I can do that pretty well, and I really look to try to figure out how I can do a better job, and how I can listen to what their concerns are, try to look at their concerns, and then fix their specific concerns about what they're talking about and what they're doing, or about what their situation is or what the recommendation is. One of the problems where I have the listening problem is when I'm listening to people. We had a conference recently, and people will stop and talk to me or want my advice on cryptocurrency, and I don't think I'm doing a strong enough job, one, listening to them actively, understanding them, and then being able to really help them solve their problem, right? Because they're really fast interactions and there's a lot of people. And, kudos to CJV. He talked to like 100 people in a line that got a picture with him, and he made it through that. So I have to give shout out to him because that takes a lot of discipline. And I think that he does a really good job at that. I want to do better at that. And so I spoke to my friend Maria, who's my girlfriend, spoke to my girlfriend Maria, and I asked her, I said, what are your thoughts on how I can do a better job at this? And I laid it out with her. When people are talking to me, sometimes it's really hard for me to focus. And so some of the things that she had mentioned was to ask questions. And that did really help the following day when I was in the second day of our conference and had that same situation happen. I took her advice. I actively asked questions, which made me more engaged in what the conversation was at. And the other thing that I did was that I paraphrased or resaid what they were saying to me so that I can make sure that I understood it, which again, I understood it when they said it to me, but I think what that allowed me to do was be more engaged in the actual conversation, and that really helped. So that's one of the second things that I've noticed and is one of my biggest gaps, is making sure that I actively listen to people when they're talking. And I think that also goes hand in hand into my other thing, because it's very, in my opinion, very sometimes overwhelming listening to people talk, especially if I'm listening to people talk in multiple people talk in a short amount of time. I can feel a little overwhelmed, and that bogs me down. And then some of the other things that, again, I think really all goes back to communication, how we communicate with our team, how I communicate in relationships. These are some of the biggest gaps that I have. And a lot of it has to do with just making sure that I have time for people. And so what I noticed that I do is I often say that I don't have enough time. And one of the things that successful people do is they reframe what it is of their situation that they're specifically in. So when I've been trying to practice this, and I've been trying to think about how to re-say some of these things, and rather than saying I don't have enough time, it's more along the lines of I'm going to make time this week to do this, or I'm going to do this at this time this week. And again, I'm just sharing these thoughts with you. I'm being open on this podcast because, again, this podcast is all about people learning together. And I don't know exactly how that reframing works when it comes to that time aspect. We always have time. It just depends on what we do in that time and how actively we manage that time and making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do. Kind of like with this podcast, right? I kept saying that I don't have the time to do my podcast. So then I've been trying to reframe my thinking and say, okay, I can't do the podcast these days, but what if I block in time to do the podcast and say, okay, at this time I can do the podcast. So say, rather than I don't have time to do the podcast, this next week, I'm going to block in time to do the podcast, or I'm going to rearrange my schedule so I can make more time for the things that are really important to me, especially as I grow the podcasting brand and my podcasting brand. Especially, we're launching something really cool at the 3TR Academy, where we are going to have many more podcasts. They're going to be live podcasts. I'm going to be a main part of this live stream, which is going to increase my brand of Age of Jeremy. And then I want them to get my other content that I have with my interviews and this main segment. And then the other segment, which is the lo-fi segment, which I'm going to probably keep it lo-fi because I like trying to find new ways to record podcasts and share them on the podcast of how I'm recording it, along with some other topics that I want to talk about. But that's one of the main things that I really want to do this year, is continue to grow this brand, but it's also going to come from the other brand. And if I'm not able to make the time for the things that I want to do, and I'm always putting into the universe, I don't have time for that, then I'm not going to have time for it. One of the things that I think has helped me kind of introspectively looked at all this is journaling. I feel that not enough people actively journal or actively sit and think. I was recently this morning talking with my girlfriend Maria, and we were talking about how, people aren't bored anymore, and people aren't bored anymore. And that's why they're not spending enough time thinking anymore, right? Because when back before we were constantly, our attention was constantly pushed on a screen, or when our attention was constantly put into some other form of media, constantly with our phones or with social media or with the television, we used to spend a lot of time thinking or reading or writing, and we don't really do that anymore. And so one of the things that I've been really trying to do, and I haven't done it as much, I think the last entry that I had was January 21st, but I have a journal, and inside of that journal, not only do I talk about my day, but I try to think through specific things, which from there, I've been able to see the problems that I specifically have. I can see the problems of how I communicate with people. I can see the problems of how I, communicate with people to try to get my specific way, things that I could be doing better. And it's only possible through introspection. I think it was Socrates, maybe it was Aristotle, maybe it was Plato, I don't know, one of the three, said that the unexamined life isn't worth living. And when we're sitting down and we're writing about who we are and what we're doing and how we think, that's when we can get really good at examining our specific life. And when we're able to examine our life and who we are and how we are, then we can see the things that we need to change, and then we can actively look to solve them. Because again, one of the main things about how leaders learn and what they do is by looking at a problem and then trying to figure out how to solve it. And that can go for us personally, that can go from a business, it can go for our relationships, it can go for our families, it can go for anything. And I'm hoping that you reach out, not reach out. I hope that you go and get the book, How Leaders Learn, whether or not you're a leader or not. Or I think we're all called to be leaders. We're all called to be leaders in Christ. We're all called to be leaders in Buddhism. We're all called to be leaders, in our communities, in our families. I feel sometimes, or even if it's just to make you a stronger, better person, try to read that book, and you can get a lot of great insight. One of the things that I think I said earlier on, and I didn't expound upon it, was that more information doesn't equal better thinking. We live in an information-saturated world. Most people learn reactively, and leaders tend to learn more selectively. A lot of average people ask, what should I learn next? Leaders ask, what problem am I trying to solve? Followers usually try to collect facts. Leaders usually try to maybe collect those facts and then build frameworks. Learning isn't about knowing things. It's about deciding on what you're going to do with the information that you have and then go actively do it. And that's where the learning comes in. I'm very involved with theoretical thinking. I think it's fantastic. I love academic work. But one of the things that I've noticed is that you can take all the theory in the world and you can learn things, but the best learning comes when you're actively doing it and you're actively pushing it forward and you're actively trying to do it. That's why I think that music's always something that's really important for children, or learning a language. It's really hard. And I think that one of the things why people don't change is because of the fact that learning can be very, very difficult. It's fun, but then there's these points where you're trying to do something and you're not really good at it when you're learning. And I think music and language is one of the best things for that. Like, it's very hard to remap the synapses in your brain to understand how sentences are structured. I've said it many, many times that the way in which we see the world is based off of our language and how our grammar is put together. So an American who speaks English might see the world differently than a French person who speaks French, or a Dane that speaks Danish, because of the fact that the way in which our language works maps out how our synapses work inside of our brain. And it's one of the most interesting things to me, because of the fact that the reason why people see the world that they see, the way that they see the world, is through language. And it also has mapped out how they put together stuff inside of their brain. So, for example, if you have, one of the best ways to prevent Alzheimer's is learning languages more than any other way. And the reason that is because when you learn languages, to construct sentences in the new language, you have to change the routes inside of your brain for the communication pieces of it and how to think about stuff in that language. And so when you do that, what happens is, think about it this way. If you're thinking in one way and you have Alzheimer's and you're on a road, the Alzheimer's is like a block in the road. But when you know different languages, what you've done is you've created different paths in that road. So as Alzheimer's, which is one of my greatest fears, as Alzheimer's happens, it puts like a rock in front of you. And so if you're driving along and there's this rock in front of you, you can't go anywhere. But if you know other languages, when that Alzheimer's starts to happen, you're actually able to think and remember in different ways, because through the process of language learning, you've created different pathways inside of your brain. And that's not easy to do. So it reasons that learning in general isn't something that's easy to do. And so we shouldn't think that things should come easy. A lot of the times people think that because it's not coming easy for them, they shouldn't do it. We can take mathematics. Most people think that they suck at mathematics because they just suck at mathematics. It's like an innate thing because their parents sucked at mathematics. Mathematics is fucking hard. You have to fucking practice it. When you practice it, you get better at it, no matter how shitty you were with it. The more that you practice it, the better you do. And that's what learning is. That's why it's difficult to learn languages. That's why it's difficult to learn music. That's why it's difficult to learn anything, programming, linguistic. It doesn't matter what it is. It's very difficult to learn anything. And it should be, because you're learning to do something that you've never actually done before, and it's not supposed to be fucking easy. It's supposed to be hard. The other thing is, when we think about it, leaders also kind of learn backwards. And this is a signature insight. Most people learn, hope it becomes useful. Leaders identify outcomes and reverse engineer the knowledge that they specifically need. So, for example, a CEO learning psychology after managing people. So, for example, you're managing people and like, well, shit, I fucking suck at this. How can I get better at managing people? Oh, I should have learned some things about psychology to learn more about it. A founder learning finance after scaling chaos. So they're doing their CEO job. They're like, shit, I don't know how to read financial statements. Let me go and learn how to do financial statements. And you see a lot of this, and this is why I think CEOs and people that are in executive positions do so well in this, is because they're constantly coming to these new problems, and then when they come to that new problem, like, well, shoot, I need to learn more about this. One of the things that I think David Novak talks really great about in his book, How Leaders Learn, is that one of the reasons why he gets on boards is because he wants to learn something from being on that specific board. So, for example, I'm working on starting an equipment rental business as just a fun side hustle, and something that I think would be cool and interesting. And so, like, if I was asked to be on a board, I might want to be on the board of Turo, or I might want to be on the board of, Lyft, or I might want to be on the board of an equipment bidding company, or a construction company, or a mining company, right? Because I need to learn that thing to make my thing that I'm kind of interested in better. And so I'm actively putting myself in a position where I have to learn about that thing, and then that's how I can become better about it. Another example that I have here is a general learning geography because war is coming. Okay, leaders don't just study subjects, they study the leverage points to get them better at the thing that they need to learn based off of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And that's why I started this off by talking about the gaps. If you know the gaps that you have, or that you're coming across, or things that you need to be better at, then you can actively go and learn about those things and put those things into place. For example, I'm thinking from a finance perspective here, being the CFO of 3-2 Warrior Academy, there's some shit I suck at, like budgeting. I need to know more about budgeting specifically so I can do a better job budgeting for the team, how to budget for the team, get bettering at that, giving them budgets, how to do things right. It's not something that I think is going to be hard. It's something that I don't do regularly. I need to get a better idea about it, and I need to block time to specifically do it. Same thing with coaching. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. How can I be better at one-on-one coaching? That's why psychology is interesting to me, or therapy is interesting to me, because I can get a better sense of how to coach people, and that helps me identifying that helps me be better at that thing that I need to try to do. The other thing is leaders tend to learn systems. So most people learn like a subject like history, business, psychology, technology, right? Leaders learn like human behavior. They learn risk. They learn timing. They learn things that are about a system so that they can repeat it. So subjects always change, and you might be like reading subjects, but it's designed to create like a system so that it can be repeatable for you specifically. That's one of the main reasons why leaders revisit the same ideas across different domains, why they sound simple but see deeper levels, why they reread books instead of chasing new ones. One of the, which is takes me back to another point, like after I'm done listening to leaders, or I'm going to try to read it, take some better notes. Like there's these constant things about we're trying to get better at how we can take these ideas that we have and put them into different areas. And that's what we mean by systems. Leaders don't ask, is this new? They ask, is this true? And if it's true, then you can take that system and then you can put it in the area that you want that system to be. And again, leaders learn through friction. Leaders learn fastest under pressure. Mistakes are data, not identity. Feedback is sought. It's not avoided. Why one of the things that I always talk about is having a feedback loop. Most people avoid discomfort. Leaders design exposure to it. If learning feels comfortable, it's probably decorative. Learning should not feel comfortable. You should be uncomfortable when you're learning something because that's the process of actually learning. It's kind of like the same thing when we lift weights, right? If you're lifting weights, and you're uncomfortable the next day, it doesn't mean that you have to be like sore, like you can't move. But like every time that I lift weights, I'm a little bit like sore, not like not moving sore, but I know that I have stretched my muscle and it's repairing itself. Okay. That's kind of like learning. When you learn something, your mind's fucking tired because you stretched it and it's trying to rebalance from the things that you're taking. Right. And so when we think about that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's supposed to be uncomfortable after the process is starting of the learning. That's what learning is. It's an uncomfortable act. And if you're not uncomfortable in the act of that learning, then you're not actually learning something that's pushing your current realm of understanding. We also live in a place where we want to read things fast. Like people get excited. I'm going to read 100 books this year. I speed read. I do all of these things, right? It's not really about that. If you can do that, that's great. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that or that you're lying. That's cool. I'm not a speed reader. I'm a very slow reader, and I'm a very deep thinker when I'm reading. Leaders tend to not rush understanding. They tolerate ambiguity longer. They resist premature certainty, right? Speed feels productive, like we're doing something. But when we go deeper, when we really understand it, that's when we're empowered because we can take it and we can teach it and we can use it in a continuous way based off of our understanding of it and having a deeper thought level of it. Leaders sit with problems. Leaders delay opinions and they use silence in part of learning. The loudest voices in the room are usually still learning how to think. And when we're thoughtful about what's happening and how we react to things, it allows us to get a clear understanding of what it is that's actually happening so that we can make assessments on specifically what to do. And this next part is something that I suck at. Leaders structure their learning. I am horrible at structuring my learning because I'm all over the place half the time. I have so much stuff going on, but leaders have an anchor to reality. So you need to tie learning to decisions you're making now. Okay. And again, there's times where you want to learn like fun stuff, but like the best learning comes from when you have a problem that needs to be solved and then you dive deep into looking at the solving of that problem. Right. And so one of the things that I do horribly is when I'm trying to learn something, I get all kinds of resources, but the fewer the resources or the fewer the sources of your learning, the higher the quality of that learning is, because you can take that concepts, reread them, rescan them, look at them, take them deeper. That's one of the reasons why I think that college can tend to work good when you're in your 300 and 400 level classes and in your master's work, because you're re-looking at the same concepts over and over and over again so that you can get them ingrained in you and you can think deeper about them. And also it moves you towards, if you continue to go on and get a PhD, it moves you towards getting that PhD level where you're an academic and you're learning and thinking. One of the things that also works is you can cross-pollinate. So you can apply ideas across fields differently. So like when you're learning something, what you learn in one area can usually cross-learn into other areas. So for example, even just take the How Leaders Learn book. Like the stuff that I'm learning in that book, I can take those concepts that I'm learning in that book, which once I'm fully done with it and reread it, I'll get some better like ideas from it specifically, rather than just me talking broadly about learning. But those ideas, I can cross use them in all areas of learning, not just from a leadership standpoint, but just as a person wanting to learn things. You can take these concepts and probably, use them across multiple fields. Leaders externalize thought. Notes are used as more workspaces and archives. So one of the things that I try to do when I'm reading, I don't do it all the time. What I've tried to do and trying to get better at is after I'm done reading something, looking at the notes and then rewriting it in my words. When you rewrite something in your words, you can get a better sense. You can start to really learn your understanding of it. And when you can't do that, then you can like look at pieces where you're like, oh, I need to understand this better. Let me go back and reread that or relearn that or touch upon that subject again. If it can't be explained or applied, it isn't learned. And so one of the things that's really important is whenever you're learning something, and something that I always do, probably annoys the piss out of people, I always try to teach it to other people in some capacity so that I can make sure that I fully understand it, because when you can't teach it, you fully don't understand it. And I find that in coaching all the time. People will ask me something and I'm like thinking about it and I'm trying to explain it and I can't explain it very well. I can't teach it to them. And that's because I don't know it well enough. So then I look at myself and I'm like, shit, I need to go and learn this well enough so I can explain this better. I come across that with technical analysis. A lot of the times as people ask me about technical analysis and I'm trying to explain certain things and then I jumble my words a little bit. And I'm like, you know what, let me go research that and I'll get back to you. People respect that, but at the same time, it's still a gap that needs to be addressed so that I can learn it better, so that I can then therefore go and teach it. One of the other things that we need to think about is that leadership doesn't mean intelligence. Knowledge doesn't equal good judgment, and insight without action decays. The biggest things that make someone a really good leader, not only just their learning, but their willingness to be wrong in public. Most people would rather be silent and correct in private. Okay. So we have to have people that aren't leaders. They have a fear of responsibility. They have a fear of consequences, and they have a fear of being seen mid-process. So if you want to be a really strong leader, you have to not be afraid of responsibility. You have to be not afraid of consequences, and you don't want to be afraid of being seen mid-process. Those are some of the biggest things when we think about leaders specifically that make them, that we can look at someone and be like, hey, maybe they're not a leader. Now, I do think that there's a difference between a manager and a leader. I think you can be a really good manager and not be a really good leader, right? And you can be a really good leader and not be a really, really good manager. If you can put both of those things together, you can be amazing. And that's one of the things that if you're in a leadership position or a manager position, you should want to specifically do. And I think that you should take some time to read How Leaders Learn. And again, leadership isn't about knowing more than others. It's about seeing what matters sooner and then acting on it anyway. The way that you learn reveals who you expect to become. If you want to think like a leader, you have to learn like one with intention, restraint, and you also want to put yourself in a place where you have specifically some skin in the game, right? So again, my name is Jeremy Quintanilla. Go learn about how to learn. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do. And I'm glad to be back recording these podcasts, and we'll be working to get them back to you every Tuesday, along with our new Conversations on the Age of Jeremy YouTube channel. And then we'll put these out as recordings afterwards. So as I always say, be thankful, grateful, and kind, and we'll talk with you next time. Bye.
Tell me, how does it feel? Tell me, how does it feel? I see the meaning of life in your eyes. It's like swimming in the ocean at night. And when I'm with you, it's like I'm on fire. Nothing is real outside myself and your smile lines bring me down with sweet soft sound. My name, the way it sparkles when it leaves your mouth, fill my soul